Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Development Control and Regulatory Board this day, Thursday, the 11th of April. May I remind everyone present that the meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council website and will also be available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. Please turn your microphones on when speaking and turn them off when you've finished speaking. Thank you. On today's meeting we have Mrs. Fryer, who's substituting for Mr. Bentley. I'd also like to welcome Josh, who's sitting with Mr. Cross as a guest today. Did you want to say anything, Mr. Cross? Or?
Yes, thank you, Joe. Good afternoon, members. Josh Kennedy, sitting next to me, is a work experience student from Leicester College who's studying to become a legal executive, and we've had him for 2 days with legal services, and that was a couple of weeks ago. And I said if he would like to come and see a real committee, make real decisions, he was welcome to come to DCRB. He's very kindly come along this morning, so thank you very much, Chairman, for your welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Moving on to the agendas then. Item number 1 is minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of March this year. Someone would like to move them if there's no queries with them or anything.
Pleased to move, Chairman.
So, thank you. Item number 2 is question time. No questions have been received. Questions asked by members under Standing Orders 7. We haven't any of those either. To advise of any item the Chairman is to take elsewhere on the agenda, there are none. Declarations of interest. It is noted that all members who are also members of a parish, town council or a liaison committee will have personal interests in those applications which relates to areas covered by those authorities. Are there any further declarations at this time? That looks to be no then, Ewan. Thank you. Presentation of standing orders. We haven't any of those. Which brings us on to item number 7, which is the quarry workings at Barrow Hill Quarry. Peter Bond is going to present this report, so over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So members will recall this application being considered at the December 2008 meeting, where it was resolved to defer the determination of the application pending some further advice from the British Horse Society. I'll just give you a quick run through of what the application is about. It's for the restoration of the long disused Barrow Hill quarry site using imported waste material. It's proposed to import up to 163,000 tonnes of material, including inert soils, clay and non-hazardous waste. An element of recycling will take place of the non-hazardous waste, which can be backhauled out of the site. Initially the site will be levelled, fenced appropriately, and a new access will be created off Mill Lane. This will create a flat base and sides to accommodate a geological/clay barrier. The applicant proposes a maximum of 50 HGV movements per day, Monday to Friday only. So that's 25 in and 25 out maximum a day, which equates to around 5 HGV movements per hour. The proposal is for a total of 4 years to complete all infill and restoration operations. The key issues that members noted at the previous committee were need, transport impacts and potential conflict with horses, their riders, and impacts on Murfield Farm. And Murfield Farm, I will point to them. I'll press the button again. Sorry, is to the northwest of the site being down here in red. This is Mill Lane, it should be used to access the site. And Murfield Farm is a residential property and a high-end livery riding school. So, following last December's meeting, further advice was sought from the British Horse Society and received. The full response is copied into the supplementary report before you, but to summarise, the British Horse Society considers Murfield Farm to be a high-end livery and training yard for international show jumpers, with paddocks adjacent to Mill Lane. The potential risk of horses bolting, jumping boundary fences and hedges, if panicked by sudden noises such as HGV, is a real issue. Mill Lane is a through route for horses, linking Bridleway U105, which is to the top, to the west here, all the way through to U107 down here and beyond, to the south of the site. The British Horse Society raises three main issues in terms of risk, which is that Mill Lane is too narrow as it stands for HGVs and horses to pass. Noise, particularly from empty HGVs as they travel along Mill Lane, could spook horses. And speed of HGVs could cause issues with any horses using the road. However, the British Horse Society does note that passing bays are needed, and this could mitigate a lot of the issues. These are proposed by the applicant. Speed control measures could mitigate these issues as well. The Highway Authority has assessed the additional response from the British Horse Society and considered that the issues raised do not change the original recommendation. The Highway Authority maintains its position that from a safety and capacity perspective, the development can take place without generating unacceptable or severe impacts. Notwithstanding this, the Highway Authority has requested further improvements to Mill Lane to those that were originally requested back in December 2018, just to widen slightly even further the Mill Lane between its junction with the A47, which is right up here, and Murfield Farm there, and some additional curbing. The recommendation remains in my report as originally proposed in December, and that is to approve the application subject to the conditions in Appendix A and the signing of a legal agreement covering off-site works, including passing bays, acoustic fencing, and other highway improvements. I'll just run through a few slides with you, Chairman, if I may. So the application site is down here, and members will note the footpaths and bridleways, and this is Mill Lane, which is a public highway linking Clickers Way, the A47, to the site. These are the final restoration contours that are proposed and have been considered to be acceptable. And a few photographs for members just to get a visual impression if they haven't been to the site. This is the current site access as it stands. This will be blocked up and not used for the development. And it's right on the very south of the site. So a couple of slides of the actual site as it stands. You can see that some waste has been tipped in there decades ago and it's been used now by off-road scramblers, motorbikes, bicycles, BMXs unlawfully. It's not in a particularly pretty state, bearing in mind it's in the middle of the open countryside. A new access is proposed straight off Mill Lane, which will cut out a rather large bend and make it a lot safer for HGVs to get in and out of the site. A couple of photographs demonstrating the width as it stands of Mill Lane, and that's looking north towards the A47 with Murfield Farm and the stabling facilities up there to the north. And this is a picture of the access from the A47, and that's looking down Mill Lane from the A47, and it's this little stretch of road that further improvements have been sought. So, Chairman, that's it from me. Recommending approval subject to the conditions based on the additional information from the British Horse Society and the responses from the Highway Authority in that regard. I'll pass it back.
Thank you, Peter. We have two speakers today on this item. A local resident, Michelle Watson from Murfield Farm, and Janice Richards, the local county councillor. Michelle, you're to speak first. If you'd like to sit over there at that desk, press the button in the middle when you're ready to speak, and you have 3 minutes, please.
you. We bought Tinkley Equestrian Centre in 2007 after working hard to be able to afford what we thought would be the perfect home and business. We did all the relevant checks with planning who assured us no planning would be given on our side of the bypass for at least 20 years. We knew the bypass was going to be built and that Hinkley Equestrian was on a small lane. Although classed as a public highway, it's also very lightly used due to it being so narrow and the state of it. The yard was chosen due to location being peaceful and most of all safe, with light traffic and for the running of a livery yard and training and breeding warm-blood horses. Of course, we knew we had traffic, but light traffic. Going from a few cars and tractors to 50 lorries passing is a massive increase and would be to any road, never mind a quiet lane. My livery yard's a thriving business and employs 3 full-time and 2 part-time staff. Liveries chose to keep our horses at our yard due to it being peaceful, safe for them to ride and also their children to ride. As I'm sure you're aware, horse riding is classed as a high-risk sport and also reflected in our insurance. We need to have covering public liability care, custody and control of livery horses. We are visited yearly and assess increased risks. I'm not sure yet as if my insurance will be willing to cover me with such a huge increased risk. I'm afraid my income would be impacted by this plan also due to liveries already mentioning that if this plan goes ahead, they may have to go to quieter yards, having to negotiate 25 lorries in and out daily, and not being able to safely ride in the outdoor menage with 25 lorries rattling up and down or being able to hack with these lorries on such a narrow lane. Loss of my liveries is loss of income, leading to my staff losing their jobs as liveries pay the wages. There's also been a lot of comments regarding the bridleway issue, and yes, this is a big issue for local riders and for some of my liveries, but for me, my issue is with being able to use my outdoor menage, which is quite close to the lane, and trying to exercise our highly fit show jumping horses and our very young horses with a huge increase in traffic, dust and rattling lorries. As well as the business impact, the impact on my home and family will be immense with dust, noise, loss of privacy, with lorries being much higher than my hedges and being able to see straight into our home and garden where my grandchildren play, especially if they intend to try and put a pass in place right outside our kitchen window as stated in the plans. In conclusion, if these plans are passed, it would be devastating financially to my business, also making my home worthless during these works. I couldn't even sell it for 3 years as an equestrian property, as no one would buy it as such. I cannot say highly enough how, if this goes ahead, it will affect my business, family, customers and staff, as fundamentally heavy goods vehicles and horses working in such close contact do not mix.
Michelle, would you just remain there a moment while I ask if any councillor would like to ask you questions on what you've said today? Nothing about the report, but about what you've said. Anybody want to ask? Looks like you're free to go then. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks for coming. Janice, it's your 5 minutes now, please.
As members will recall, I attended the DCRB meeting on December the 13th and relayed my deep concerns with this proposal. And now, having read further information with the proposal, I feel compelled to again speak to you all. You will have read the report from the members of the British Horse Society, which speaks volumes as to why this proposal is of grave concern to myself and other people. The report in page 7, item 11, it states that HA notes changes in the law on the 9th of March 2018. The Highway Code's insistence that cars should leave a decent distance between them and cyclists when passing, 1.5 metres. However, in the officer's report it states, and I quote, "However, this requirement has not been extended to horses in the Highway Code, so there is no requirement for this. I have never read such a statement in my life." Does it mean that it takes no notice of horses? Because they need a far greater width than vehicles when passing. Page 38, item 98, Transport Rights of Way, states perhaps the biggest concern with this application relates to the need for HGVs to travel along Mill Lane, which is a single track with very limited passing opportunities and a surface that is very poor condition with large potholes. It is also used by horse riders and other non-vehicle traffic with no footways. It states that it is a public right of highways, but my argument to that is it is called it is being called a highway, but as it is an unmade lane, not fit to be called a highway, and if it is passed, it will become a very dangerous situation. Page 39, item 103, the right-of-way officers has raised concern regarding the potential conflict with HGVs and other users of local rights-of-way. He also recommends a condition be imposed requiring a mitigation plan that seeks to provide safe routes for pedestrians and horse riders. How this is going to be accomplished, I just don't know. I would ask that this proposal is rejected as it is against policies WDC 8, WDC 9, WC 10/23 and WDC 11. And to finish, the equestrian centre and family would be greatly suffer if as would the other vehicles and pedestrians and horses. I have great concerns of the health and safety issues, and I've read the report. No one has given me assurances in these reports to change my mind. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Janice. Could you just remain there whilst there's any questions for you? All silent, Janice, off you go. Thank you. Thanks, Janice. Open to members then, please. Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to the speakers. I was actually at the meeting in December as well, so I am familiar with this. I think I have 4 points I would just like to do. I'll do them all at once, so then it saves the internet. There was mention made by the officer in the presentation that there will be speed controls. I'd like to know how they would, what type of speed controls they're envisioning. Speed bumps, oblique cushions, road surface alteration can be very noisy, particularly when empty HGVs are accelerating or decelerating to go over these. So that would be another noise concern. So I'd like an answer to that. How the policing of the no right turn onto Clickers Way, is there a chance that maybe vehicle movement lights or something like that, we have them in our village, could be considered for that, to make sure, because people will turn right. You can put up as many signs as you like, and unless someone's standing there, they'll go the wrong way. On page 11, condition 8, there's mention made of all vehicles exiting the site shall have their wheels cleaned as may be necessary. That's a bit vague. Who decides as it's necessary or not? All wheels should be cleaned leaving the site. And whereabouts? Is it when they leave the site and then go up Mill Lane? Or is it when they get to the end of Mill Lane? And what will happen to the silt and the surface water from these cleaning of vehicles? I was at a quarry on Tuesday night, and I know it's a big event, but all vehicles have their wheels cleaned, whatever size you are, leaving that site or on that site. And finally, also on page 11, conditions 5 and 6. If you read condition 6, it says notwithstanding condition 6 above, but condition 6 above is actually condition 5. And it says no HGV shall enter the site and no crushing operation be undertaken except between 7 and 5 Monday to Friday. But it says no operation shall be carried out on the site except 7 till 6 on a Monday to Friday and 7 till 1 on a Saturday. To my fairly simple mind, that's a contradiction of conditions. So those are my 4 points I would like clarifying, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Peter, do you want to have a go at those now, please?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, with regard to speed control, there's no proposals for physical speed control in terms of bumps or ramps or tables, anything like that. Speed will be controlled due to the nature of Mill Lane in itself, it's very narrow, although it would be improved in terms of passing bays, etc. The surface, I think members went down there in the minibus, the surface itself will restrict speed. It's also, it's not a quick road for anybody to use. It's a 60 mile an hour road by definition. However, there's no plans, and I don't think there's been any request from Highway Authority to actually put in any physical aspects that would control speed. With regard to the no right-hand turn, we can't control, we can't limit that formally by a condition because it's on the public highway. It's not within land under the control of the applicant. So, unfortunately, we can't have a condition that says HGVs will not turn right at that junction between the Mill Lane and A47. The wheel wash, now that would be on the application site itself. It wouldn't be anywhere along Mill Lane, it would be within the site, and any sort of silt and mud that gets washed off the vehicles would be just left on the site. The materials come from the site, it would be retained in the site. I think you raised a very important point with regard to condition 6. There's a typing error there. Apologies for that, members. It should say notwithstanding condition 5 in condition 6. Now, what these two conditions try to subtly control is that the applicant is requested to be able to work on Saturdays, and we've got no particular problem with site operations taking place on Saturdays. It's quite remote. In terms of impacts on local residents, noise, etc., will be very, very limited. However, what we're trying to do by condition 6 is say, yes, you can work Saturdays, but you can't have any HGVs accessing the site that day. And you can't also crush, because crushing is a particularly noisy operation, which we don't generally allow on any site on Saturdays across the county, across most waste sites. So there is a subtle difference. They are complementary, as far as I read it myself, and I wrote it, so maybe I'm too close to the project, shall we say, but as far as I read it, it makes perfect sense that they can work Saturdays, however, they cannot have HGVs into the site bringing material in, and they can't crush. And that's to minimise impacts on local amenity. And it's also just to assist, I suppose, and mitigate impacts on recreational users of Mill Lane, be it pedestrians or horse riders or other users of Mill Lane who may use it more frequently on Saturdays than they would Monday to Friday. So I hope that sums up everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Dan?
I'm concerned with any work on a Saturday. I'm looking at proper mitigation. The leisure users and horse riders, people who frequent that lane on a regular basis, would actually know what they're doing. If there's staff going up and down in cars to go there, and what I'm trying to do is find a way to find some sort of relief in this. The whole presentation, whilst it's 100% correct and legally presented correctly, it's an absolute anomaly. I'm just looking across, and I think less than 2 decks width, and I've been down there, and a lorry coming, it's going to fill that. And I know when we went down in the minibus, on leaving the site, and it was driven very slowly, there was a young woman from the stables, I think, who appeared in front, and you could see, although it was slow, the panic was there, and she slipped trying to get up the bank, because it isn't possible to even be there with that and let us go by. So the severity of that is really, really serious. So I think if Saturday and Sunday were days that people could feel safe to walk up and down and not be confronted with somebody whizzing off the site in a car or a van, I just think that there has to be some harmonising and a little bit of give and take on this. I'm also concerned to know about passing bays and the frequency of them and the distance they're apart, because it has to be all within visual sight. You can't have something around a bend because we won't know how to operate, so I'm concerned about that. And the obvious thing to me is, why haven't we got traffic lights? Sort of temporary traffic lights would be positioned at one end, and the sensor movement type of thing, you know, this would bring a lot of peace to people's minds who's got to go up and down there, who are walking up there, they see a green light, they know that they could go up and there's nothing actually going to come. It's absolutely outrageous if you're going to have 50 heavy vehicles going up and down and there's nobody there to control them other than their sense to see somebody in the distance or quite close, and they have to stop. And that person has then got to try and climb up a bank. And down there we spotted people in the 60s and 70s who were nature people, walking out, enjoying the nature and the wildlife. And how are they going to scramble up? And what are they got to do? Run all the way back if they're capable to a safe area. I just feel that the safety, and I'm talking about safety and danger, these are the key elements of this. When we're human beings confronted with a large lorry, we have no chance. If we can't run, we're in trouble. And you've already remarked on the potholes, so anybody trying to evacuate the area quickly could even trip over. Who knows what would happen. So I think what we need to do is find some mitigation. I understand the presumption to grant, and I haven't got a planning reason legally other than say, look, we could try and make it safer for people. We have our responsibility. If someone was killed there, I would hate to think my hand went up to support this, and we didn't take due care and attention of what we could do by saying traffic lights, proper bays, so people feel a bit safer. This is a massive intrusion into the countryside, into a quite normal lane. I mean, after all, as I say, it's not even the width of 2 desks. And there is banking there, not all the way, but there is banking, and if you're caught in a bad spot, it's not good news. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dan. Peter, please.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to the hours of operation, conditions 5 and 6 set out what is proposed by myself. Members have got it within their gift. If they wish to have no workings whatsoever on a Saturday and Sunday and bank holiday, 5 and 6 can be amended. In fact, 6 wouldn't be needed. And we can just adjust all the other numbering. And we can change 5 quite simply to remove any operations on Saturdays, Sundays and bank holidays. So that's clearly a matter for members if they so wish to do so. With regard to the passing bays, now, the plan in front of you on the presentation has got several passing bays all the way along Mill Lane between the new access proposed here and the junction with Clickers Way. Now, these have been assessed technically by the Highway Authority's engineers and have been deemed to be suitable and appropriate for what's being proposed at the site. Now, I'm not a highway engineer, and I'm happy for David to take over in a second if he can add something to that. But that technical drawing has been approved in principle by our engineers as providing a safe and acceptable mitigation strategy for allowing vehicles and pedestrians and horses to pass. I'll let David talk about traffic lights. And clearly safety and danger, it is a concern for everyone here, and it's an understandable concern. From a planning perspective, from my position, as I see it, it's a public highway where anybody has the legal right to drive down there or ride down there or cycle down there, and there will always be a danger of conflict not only on that particular highway but on any highway. And the HGVs that would go there would be going somewhere else and potentially cause a conflict somewhere else. Now, I understand. I perfectly understand. I think it just has to be remembered that it is a public highway maintainable at the Highway Authority's expense, as far as I'm aware. It's not costing much, no. But I think it's appropriate for the Highway Authority to comment on some of your points, Ray, so I'll pass you to David.
Good afternoon, yes. The first point, I would point out that that's the initial scheme, I believe, Peter's put up there. So Following members' concerns in December, I spoke to our engineers again, and one of them suggested an improved scheme could be conditioned where the passing places are longer along Mill Lane to provide more relief for HGVs and horses, pedestrians as appropriate. So we've advised the County Planning Authority that a condition to that effect would be acceptable from a highways point of view. So hopefully that would alleviate some highway safety concerns. Obviously that's our primary concern as the Highway Authority. Safety is a key issue as part of NPPF, and that's one of the reasons we could advise refusal on if we felt able to do so. However, we feel that the applicant has mitigated the impact of their development, notwithstanding our further comments for a revised scheme. So we consider a revised scheme could adequately mitigate the impact of the proposed development at this site. With regards to traffic lights on Mill Lane, my understanding is that they will be temporary in nature, although 3 years, according to colleagues, would not be considered temporary. And the batteries in those traffic lights would have to be changed every week. And I don't know whether other councillors have come across them, but they can be unreliable at times, I think. So we may have an issue with maintenance, although it would be up to the applicants to check those traffic lights are working still. So that would possibly be an option, but the Highway Authority didn't consider it was a reasonable condition as part of this application. And finally, depending on the location of those traffic lights, if they were more towards Muirfield Farm, it could, in theory, cause back onto the A47, which we would totally be against, and would likely cause other safety issues for all other highway users. So if members were minded to include a condition regarding temporary traffic lights, careful consideration would have to be given to the location and how those traffic lights would work.
Thank you. Mrs. Wright.
Thank you. Forgive me, because a lot of what I was going to say has already been said, so I'm trying to pick through my notes as I go and find out what's been said so not to repeat it. So, although I agree with the application in principle, I have really grave concerns about the practicality and the safety grounds with it. I had concerns when it came to the first meeting in December, and following on from the British Horse Society report, I think that's only reaffirmed what my concerns were. It's obvious from anybody who's been down that road, it's not a normal highway. And therefore, really, as said in the report, you can't treat it as such when referring to mitigation, a normal traffic mix of pedestrians and safety. How do they get out of the way is one of my points. In one part of the report, it actually describes the road as a condition as atrocious. And as I say, my biggest concern is that the conditions presented to mitigate the problems cannot, in practical terms, be enforced, or I can't see how that can happen. For example, a courtesy agreement will be difficult to police. How do we enforce it? Particularly when the operation being talked about is likely to be on an ad hoc basis. How do you embed this or establish patterns, especially if there's new drivers coming on and using the lane? Hilary raised about the wheel washing. That was something I asked before. I understood that that was going to be at the bottom of the lane after the trucks had travelled it. My question was then, was it a bucket and a brush, or is it a mechanical wheel wash? I'm surprised that it will be at the site where the drivers come off and then go down the lane, because at the end of that lane it's very muddy, it's very narrow, so they're likely to pick up mud by going on the verges. I then really worry that the mud is then going to be dragged onto a national speed limit highway. I have concerns anyway about laden lorries pulling on and off that highway on a national speed limit. Could you please answer what signage would be planned or could we install on the actual highway to say, be prepared, lorries may be pulling out and be very slow? I think I've exhausted more or less what I was going to say. But I do feel, citing policies that the local councillor cited, DM10, safety of pedestrians and cyclists and horse riders, the adverse impact on the stables, which was on page 30.54, and also policy WDC11. I'm sorry, I really do not feel convinced from a practical point of view that we can safely enforce those conditions, and I need that reinforcing from what Dan and Hilary have previously said. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, are you able to address any of Mrs. Wright's concerns?
Yeah, I think some of the points have been covered already. I think with regards to the wheel wash, as a county planning authority, what we are charged with doing is seeking to ensure that any development site doesn't bring on waste to the public highway. What we can't do, as far as I'm concerned and aware, is we can't stop vehicles picking up detritus from the public highway and deposit it somewhere else on the public highway, because that's what you're suggesting, is that the wheel wash shouldn't be on the application site. It should be at the top end of Mill Lane, which obviously the applicant doesn't control Mill Lane. And what we have to do is make sure that site material remains on site and doesn't get brought onto the public highway. Mill Lane is a public highway, and rightly or wrongly, the highway authority is responsible for its surfacing. And I don't think we can reasonably expect a wheel wash facility to be put on the public highway by the applicant, if that makes sense. Signage, there's no reason why we can't include off-site signage into a Section 106 agreement. The exact nature of what would be acceptable would be a matter for the technical highway authority engineers, because there's strict rules on what signage you can have on certain speeds of road speeds. So that's not an issue. That can be included in any legal agreement that appropriate signage is put on the A47 on Mill Lane, as the highway authority seeks and deems appropriate.
I take your point on the wheel wash. I mean, from the last meeting, I understood it was going to be located down there, so it was a surprise when you said that. But what I was asking is, we still haven't gone into specifics, what kind of a wheel wash will it be? Because it needs to be quite robust, given the conditions that, one, it's coming off a site, and two, it's got to travel down that lane. I take your point about we can't be responsible for taking it or dragging it on, but we could be more precise in the condition to insist that it is quite a robust wheel mechanical system.
Yes. A couple of issues again. Just going back to the signage, if you look at the recommendation in the report, recommendation 1 includes signage to be within a planning obligation. Now, condition 8, proposed condition 8, requires all vehicles exiting the site to have their wheels cleaned as may be necessary, so that no mud or other debris is deposited on the public highway. And then I think there's a further condition, condition 11, requires prior approval of a wheel cleaning facility. Personally, I don't think I've come across a site or an application where we've stipulated previously a specific type of wheel wash that has to be in place. We, as a county planning authority, usually have a condition that requires the prior approval of a wheel cleaning facility, and it's up to the applicant to propose that, and we will consider that with the highway authority and engineers and to make sure it's suitable, because some wheel wash facilities are very expensive, very high end, may require electricity to power them and clean the water, some may not. It's a very remote location, and there's not that many HGVs coming in and out compared to other developments that we approve here. So we've got to be reasonable as to what we expect from the applicant in this instance, and that's why there's a condition requiring further approval.
Yeah, just to say, with respect, that we don't get many highways in this condition.
Thank you again, Peter. Mr. Crooks.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the reasons, that, as I understand it, that the Highway Authority is going along with this is the fact that the suggestion is that there'll only be 2 lorries an hour. But this morning when I asked the question, it was admitted that that could be 25 lorries all in 1 hour and none for the rest of the day. And in my opinion, that would make it far more dangerous, even though it did get the rest of the day quiet. My other concern was, having gone down there in the minibus, where the minibus was brushing along the sides in places, even with lay-bys and the size of these lorries nowadays, they're not all going to be 10-ton tippers, some will be 20-tonners. I don't think with lay-bys they're going to be able to pass one another certainly not easy, and if at all, because as was pointed out this morning, there's a ditch on one side that would have to be filled. On the other side, you've got a hedge, so you'd have to take the hedge out to manage to do it. In the report, it says about a 1.5 metre clearance for cyclists that hadn't been extended to horses, but I think that still should be took into account, because horses are a lot more unpredictable to noise, and they can panic. So, you know, I think even though it's not a law, I think we should be looking at that. And the British Horse Society in their read-up said that these are highly strung, valuable show jumpers, and they will not mix with lorries, especially on a 3 metre width track. Relying on conditions, speed on the track, I don't know whether that's one of the things that's been suggested, but certainly the police won't enforce it. They don't enforce it on the ordinary roads, so that's out. It talks about a condition about cutting back the vegetation and maintenance happening. Again, I can't see that being enforced, because again, it's like all planning applications. You give these conditions and then nothing happens with them afterwards. And also the Highway Authority imposing conditions, again, is not realistic. Again, I doubt it will be enforced. It talks about owner-drivers in the Horse Association's report, and I've had a similar problem with that in Nailston, where owner-drivers were cutting through Nailston against the weight limit, driving at speed, because they found out that if they did that, they could get 11 loads in a day instead of 10. And it's all big money for them. So they'll risk it. So even though the road is rough, these lorries go on building sites, you know, and that can be just as rough, if not rougher. So it's not going to slow them down that much. So I think the report from the British Horse Society, it says in the report that it's not altered the opinion, but it's confirmed mine from the site visit and from the previous meeting. I've still got grave concerns on this one, and there are some recommendations in the Incley and Bosworth local plan, DM9, DM10, DM17 and DM2 all touch on issues that would cover these concerns, apart from the Leicestershire Waste Plan. So I think personally, if it's down to me, I would refuse this application, Chairman. I'd like to overturn it.
Peter, are you... I mean, a lot of this stuff is really repeated, but, you know, is there anything that you can pick out on what Mr. Crooks has said to you?
Thank you. Just a couple of points. With regard to HGVs and sizes, I think it's fair to say that 99% of the HGVs that will be visiting the site are of the 8-wheel, 18 to 20 tonne version that we see all around the county and all around the country. I very much doubt we would see anything larger than that. It could be possible to have a condition that restricts, and I'm not a HGV expert, but instead of tonnage, you could say that no articulated HGV should enter the site. That may then, I think that would have to be waste specific, because machinery needed on the site may be brought in by an articulated lorry, but obviously that would be few and far between. I think just going back to the 1.5 metre clearance for that's stated in the highway code. I think clearly that's designed for vehicles that are overtaking cyclists, and obviously your concerns on particularly relevant here to horses and the riders. I think the idea with the passing bays is that there isn't overtaking and there isn't passing as such while both vehicles are moving. I think the idea is that one of the two is stationary. And I think it's a subtle difference between overtaking a cyclist and overtaking somebody, be it a horse or the other way around, a horse overtaking a HGV that's parked in a lay-by passing bay. So potentially a subtle difference there.
Which backs up the horse or the lorry? It's not going to be easy for either of them.
It's not, but I think the whole idea of that scheme that's in front of you there is that, particularly when you're sat in a cab at 2 metres or however high you are in an HGV cab, you have got visibility above the existing hedges and fences that are along there, and that you can see in advance far enough to know if something's coming before you commit yourself to driving along a specific stretch of that road. That's the idea anyway, as far as I'm aware. And that's it, Chair.
Sean?
Yes, we've had a little look at issues around the highway code. I've actually got the highway code up in front of me, and I'm just going to quote the relevant paragraph from the 2019 highway code, paragraph 215, and it relates to horse riders and horse-drawn vehicles. Be particularly careful of horse riders and horse-drawn vehicles, especially when overtaking. Always pass wide and slow. Horse riders are often children, so take extra care, and remember riders may ride in double file when escorting a young or inexperienced horse rider. Take great care and treat all horses as a potential hazard. Now, we've got policy on this as well. This is the NPPF, paragraph 109. Development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there will be an unacceptable impact on highway safety, or if the residual cumulative impact on the road network will be severe. Now, we're often told it's all about whether the impact, the cumulative impact, is severe. But there's a different test for safety. With cumulative impact, the test is severity. With safety, it's whether it's acceptable. I think we need to make a judgment on that. We're entitled to do so. We've got our own policy, WDC8, which has been mentioned, I believe. Planning permission will not be granted for waste management development which is likely to generate unacceptable, that word again, adverse effects from, and it lists a whole load of things: noise, dust, vibration, odour, emissions, illumination, visual intrusion, or traffic, to adjoining land uses and users and those in close proximity to the waste management development. I think that applies in this case. WDC 10, it's not written particularly well, if I have to say, but I think the spirit of it does come through. Planning permission will not be granted for waste management facilities involving the transport of waste by road where the proposed access arrangements would be unsafe and inappropriate to the proposed development, and the impact of traffic generated would be detrimental to road safety to an unacceptable degree. And the highway network is unable to accommodate the traffic that will be generated and have an unacceptable impact on the environment of local residents. I think that does apply if you read the spirit of it. So we've got the highway code, we've got the NPPF, 2 items from our own policy. I think we're entitled, and I'll take legal advice on this, to make our own judgment on safety. But I think the way the law is written, the policy is written, guides us to making a decision which suggests that this is unacceptable in safety terms and therefore should be refused.
Thank you, Chairman. Can we just clear up, first of all, this legal requirement? I understand it went to the House of Lords about the distance and the overtaking of horses and cycles. So perhaps Mr. Cross can give us that legal determination on that. I'm also concerned, so the lay-by and the width wide enough to get 2 lorries by. We're being given no measurements. And I think we need to know how wide these vehicles are that are using this track, and how much road width there is between the road and the lay-by, because my experience of these things, that they're bigger than normal HGVs, and I can't imagine how, with the ditch one side, the narrow strip of land the other, you can get enough width in to actually get the two to pass. But I like that minuting, because at the end of the day, we may not be here in a short period of time, and before we make a decision, we ought to have everything tied up so we know exactly what we are voting on and passing. So that's that. The other thing that concerns me is that the hedges will be maintained. Who by? At what height? The officer said that, you know, if you're sitting in an HGV, you're 2 metres high in the air, you can grow a hedge up to 20 foot. You can't see over it then. We've got various bends in the road. If I was driving a wagon from one end, I don't know what's coming down the other end. You say you can see over the hedge, you may not be able to see over the hedge. I don't know how high the hedges are at the moment, but, you know, and people also plant trees in hedges as well, which in the summertime would obscure the view even more. So I've got a lot of concerns about this, besides what other people have said. I'm trying to say something a bit different. But if Mr Cross could comment on the legal situation, Sean's read out about the highway code, and that's quite explicit in there, which is a legal document. So I'm concerned.
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. Peter, have you any information on the hedges, at least for Mr. Bolter?
No specific information on the hedges and the heights and what they currently are at, although there's some photographs that we've shown that demonstrate the current hedges, because that photograph was taken last week. Ultimately, the landowner, be it the highway authority or the farmer, is responsible for maintaining the hedges, as far as I'm aware. But I understand Mr. Bolter's concerns. Right. So, as David just confirmed, if they overhang the highway authority has the powers to cut them back. With respect to the House of Lords matters, I'm sure Anthony will hopefully be able to fill us in with that. But with regard to the width of an 8-wheel HUV, Google tells me, according to Reliable Aggregate Delivery Company, that they are 2.5 metres wide as a standard 8-wheel HGV that would be used to bring material in and out of this site. Now that has been assessed, and I understand what you're saying about you've got no widths of the highway in front of you. Well, obviously that highway width changes as it goes up and down Mill Lane. Not only the actual pavement that you can see there, but also the width the Highway Authority control land changes as it goes up and down, and that's been assessed in great detail by the highway engineers, and the actual extent of the highway boundary has been assessed against the plans proposed by the applicant, and has been agreed that they are sufficient and there is sufficient space to meet the requirements for the passing bay widths.
In that case, Chair, it should be a condition on the width of the lorry. If that's what the highways base their decision on, the width of the lorry, and then that should be a condition, so the company can't use wider lorries, because that does falls foul of what the highway people have said.
Is that a feasible thing to do, Peter?
Whether that's enforceable and reasonable, I'd be happy to take Nick's and Anthony's advice on that. And I think before we put that condition on, I would very much like to be specific with a bit more accurate on the width. I'm relying on Google to tell me it's 2.5 metres wide. That's a measurement I've heard previously.
Oh, Nick.
Thank you. Just to add to that comment, I think you'd expect a vehicle that would serve a development of this type to be around 2.5 metres. The planning system can't control every eventuality, every type of vehicle. All you can do is look at the likely type of vehicle that would serve a development of this type. And you've seen from the report and from colleagues that the passing bays that are proposed are sufficient width to allow vehicles to pass that would serve this development. Now, that's not to say that there couldn't be, you know, the occasional larger vehicle. A scheme of this type could never deal with every single eventuality, and that's not what it's intended to do. It's intended to mitigate against the impacts of developments insofar as what's reasonable. And I think that's all we could ever possibly do in a situation like this.
Chairman, may I just ask for clarification that if we are presuming that, or we're expecting HGV vehicles to be approximately 2.5 metres wide, I think you'll find that's the chassis, not including wing mirrors. So you're probably looking more like 3.5 metres, 3 metres, because it's the axle and the chassis that the width is taken from. So you would be looking that when we have a passing bay, one would expect from edge to edge for 2 vehicles to pass, you will be looking for approximately 6 to 7 metres to allow for 2 sets of wing mirrors, for 2 sets of people, and possibly also in the parking bay another vehicle and or rider or pedestrians or wheelchairs or bicycles. So really from edge to edge, for safety from everybody's concern, not only the users but the HCV people as well. These lorries aren't cheap and they don't want to get them smashed up, and particularly if they're owner drivers. You would need, I would say, approximately 7 metres from edge to edge, which I'm not a surveyor, I'm not that, but I did run a heavy goods driving school, so that's where I'm getting my widths from. But also 7 metres, I don't know that even if we can go back to the photograph, is that would 7 metres is, if my maths are right, is somewhere in the region of about 23 feet. As I can't work in metres very well, I have to go revert back. Would that be, bearing in mind you've got a hedge and you've got a ditch, and saying that the farmer or the landowner is responsible for the maintenance of the hedge, if a lorry goes through it, that's not his fault. That's our fault. And I have to say, with the greatest respect to our highways department, and I do respect our highways department, and I respect this council, to say that the county council maintain this road, I think is a bit of an understatement. My garden path looks better than that. So that's all I would like to say, is that I am worried about whether we, councillors have said, is the actual, you can't just say, oh well, it's that, it's got to be the total width of 2 vehicles side by side with wing mirrors.
Thank you, Mrs. Fryer. Oh, carry on.
Yeah, perhaps it will be our responsibility to maintain it as part of a maintenance schedule. I could not guarantee that that's been maintained, obviously, based on the pictures that we've been shown today, so I wouldn't like to put my neck on the block and suggest that by any stretch of the imagination. Can I just go back to the passing bays, if I could? I've had a highway engineer check these plans, and they are purely for planning purposes, so I would hope the councillors would take in mind that this will be subject to a Section 278 legal agreement, which would also be subject to a Stage 2 road safety audit. So any further issues that would be picked up from that, we would expect the applicant to address those issues before we would, as a highway authority, issue technical approval. So there are mechanisms in place to pick up any issues that aren't considered at planning at the moment. So on the other thing, I should just point out, from the British Horse Society's report, I never saw any evidence of the number of horse riders that actually used Mill Lane. So it was very difficult to quantify how often HGVs and horses could potentially come into conflict. So like Nick said earlier, whilst we do take into account average conditions, it would be difficult to suggest, for example, if the equestrian centre took some horses down there, I could not guarantee that they could not come into conflict with HGVs, but over an average hour, we didn't think that would be the case.
Okay. Thank you. I've got Mr. Parton next. I think after that we could do with perhaps looking for a proposition from someone taking into account the various things that's been said this afternoon. So, Mr. Parton.
If we have a limit on the size of vehicles, which I'm unclear as to whether the planning authority can include such a condition. But if that were the case, even in a situation where the company had a voluntary agreement, surely that would mean that to move this amount of inner soils and clays, you'd actually need more lorry journeys, or you'd actually need to extend the licence of the time periods of the works, which would actually not help the situation at all, because it would just prolong it. I also looked at, while we've been talking, a company that supply lorries for developments like projects like this, and they do say that a tipper would need to get through a 9-foot, which is 2.75 metre gap on level ground with a straight run, but with wing mirrors that goes to 10 foot and 3.5 metres, and they also make a disclaimer which is quite interesting, where they say drivers are instructed not to tip where there is a possibility that damage could be caused, health and safety compromised due to site constraints. Now, I know they're not tipping on the lane, but certainly we could quite legitimately conclude that there is a compromisation of health and safety due to a site constraint.
Peter.
Everyone took one step backwards then. I'm not sure. I think Anthony might be the best person in the room to respond to that query. I'm not sure it's reasonable for the Highway Authority, where we've got clear instruction from the... I don't think it's reasonable for the Planning Authority, where we've got clear instruction from the Highway Authority that there is no severe impact on the public highway, to be looking to resist development because of potential vehicle sizes. The standard vehicle sizes are well known to the Highway Authority and have been looked at, I'm sure, in great detail by the engineers when they have considered the proposed mitigation scheme. And as you clearly pointed out, that the potential impacts that you're concerned about as members are on the highway, not on the site itself. The site's fine. But if Mr. Cross has got anything to add to that, I'd be most welcome to hear it.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Mr. Cross is my next port of call to sum up on what he's heard today with regard to legal items. Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, with Mr. Bolter's query, as far as I'm aware, it's just a House of Lords debate with regard to implications for horses. And in the crib sheet that I get periodically in terms of updates to the law, I'm not seeing anything in terms of any changes to the highway code. Now, that's not to say that in terms of any debate, the government minister who responded may have given a commitment to review or look at, could have been possible. But as we sit here now, in terms of decision making, the highway code hasn't been changed. That's the answer. I hope to help Mr. Bolter on that one. In terms of Mr. Parton's query and Peter's response, well, I just have to add that you remember or you recall that the Planning Authority and the Highway Authority give advice in terms of objective advice in the public interest, and not taking any side. But you, of course, are the decision maker now in terms of this decision. So it's for you to weigh in terms of what you've heard to determine whether you feel that either you can approve this with any amended conditions, or indeed you feel that you should reject this application. But in rejecting this application, you do, of course, need to reject it in terms of planning reasons, and the planning reasons have to follow the policy reasons, and the policies have been set out at length in the report. So I'll stop there, because I think someone like me can waffle on quite a lot on this, but I think that's the key point I want to give you at this stage, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Would anybody like to make a proposition? David?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm the first one to admit that I do not like this application. But there again, to refuse it, we have to give reasons, and those reasons must be defensible as an appeal. I don't think they're there. I've heard all the professional advice this afternoon, and indeed back in December, and I repeat, I don't like it. But what is to stop horses, and what is to stop heavy goods vehicles using this facility now, this road now? It really is a difficult decision, I know, but I'm going to propose that we support the officer's recommendation and approve along their lines. That will give members the opportunity to either support it or not, or to put forward an amendment if they so wish. But I think what I've heard, I don't like it, but I've got to support the officer's propositions. The amended ones, of course.
Well, I didn't think you did. Wasn't clear. It wasn't that clear, Mr. Crook. I'm not trying to be difficult, but
I'll put an amendment in that we do
yeah. David, what about? Did you want to add any further conditions to this? Or I mean, you know, there's lots of conditions been mentioned this afternoon.
But Chairman, I don't see any point in putting conditions on unless they're enforceable. And I think that to say that horses can't go down there, or lorries, on a Saturday up until 1 o'clock, again, is not defensible. I repeat, I don't like it, but I will support the officer's recommendation on this afternoon, amending.
Okay. Tony, you haven't spoken and you've indicated, so... Thank you, Tony. Well, we've got a proposition and a second of Mr. Cross. Do we take this now and...
Always difficult with regulatory decisions where you have in the Constitution you talk about amendments with regard to policy decisions. So I think my advice with regard to this one is that you've got it's been moved and seconded to approve. So what has to happen is you have to take a vote on that. And depending on the result, we'll then take matters to the next stage. But I think, for the purposes of summing up from a legal perspective, members have heard the views. You've got the professional advice to approve. You have raised between you a number of issues of concern, and you have to weigh up, I suppose, whether those issues of concern constitute strong enough planning reasons that will result in a refusal. So shall we take the vote first on whether you wish to approve or not, and then we'll decide?
Councillor Jennings and Gillard said that they would like to propose acceptance with the amendments, officers' amendment. Is that included when I discussed my questions and the officer said that we could amend the hours of operation, conditions 5 and 6, to take out, because it was a bit of a confusion. Take out number 6 completely and just have the hours of operation Monday to Friday, 7 till 6. And that the officer did, Mr. Holt did indicate that that would be possible as an amendment. Now, I'm not sure whether the proposal put forward by my colleagues, where they did mention, as amended, that includes that. Thank you.
David, could we be clear on what you was actually proposing then in this case, so that we are clear?
Yes, well, there is confusion between conditions 5 and 6, and I think that does need amending to the hours of operation, but not totally banning Saturday operation.
Okay. Nick.
Thank you, Chairman. Just so I can be clear, that there is another subtle difference between conditions 5 and 6, in that condition 6 relates to crushing in HGVs, but also restricting it till 5 o'clock, whereas condition 5 refers to operations to 6 o'clock. So if we were to remove condition 6 entirely, then that would effectively permit crushing until 6 o'clock. So it would extend the crushing operation.
With the greatest respect, the officer, Mr. Holt, did indicate that we could make it that all operations, including crushing and HGV, could be amended. It was in our gift or power to make the amendment for condition 5 to be from 7 o'clock till 1700 hours, if it was the general feeling of this committee. So that's how I understood it from Mr. Holt when I asked my question, but I may have got it wrong. I'm quite appreciate that.
That's absolutely right. It's in your gift to make those amendments as you see fit, as the committee sees fit. It's just being clear that what amendments you require to those conditions, so that we're clear on what the wording is going to be. Clearly there's the issue of amending the reference to condition 6 within condition 6, so we can obviously deal with that one. But it's just being clear in terms of what the wording you would like to have in relation to conditions 5 and 6.
So can we be clear on what we're actually voting on now? Because it seems to be going...
Chair, I'd like to speak against the motion, if I may.
Beg your pardon?
I'd like to speak against the motion, if I may.
To speak to it?
Against the motion, if I may, yes.
Okay.
Okay. I did ask earlier, well, I sort of put the point forward that the severity of impact is the wrong test and the correct test is the unacceptable impact on highway safety. I'd like some confirmation that that is in fact the case, and also whether the various policy items, MPPF paragraph 109, perhaps 110C, WCDC8 and WDC10 are actually applicable were we to take the decision to refuse. And we could then use those to justify a decision. We need some advice on this, please, Chair.
Mr. Sheehan's points do stack up in policy terms. Unfortunately, at the moment, you've got before you a recommendation to approve with some amendments subject to fine-tuning with regard to conditions 5 and 6. So at the moment you're still on whether you wish to approve this, and if you don't, then you have got reasons for refusal, as Mr. Sheehan has articulated. And from a legal perspective, subject to any comments that Nick has as your sort of head of planning, I can't find any fault with what Mr. Sheehan is saying in terms of policy terms.
Right, it looks like we're having a vote on David Jennings' proposal to approve with the alteration of conditions 5 and 6. Is that your understanding, Mr. Cross?
I just think we still need a little bit of clarity on the what's happening to conditions 5 and 6. As Nick has said, we do need to be clear on what, if you approve this, you want conditions 5 and 6 to say, noting the subtle difference they're covering two different things effectively. So if we could go back, perhaps the best thing is to go back to page 11, where we've got conditions 5 and 6. Perhaps the first thing to do is look at condition 5, take that in isolation. If members are happy with that, then there's no need for any amendment. Do the same exercise with regard to condition 6. Because obviously from an officer perspective, you have the advice, but obviously we're now looking for members to give us a steer, a lead, in terms of what you feel. Right. If you wish to delete 6 altogether, now you just want some, let's double check to get some planning advice, whether that actually stacks up.
Planning advice?
Okay, if we delete 6 altogether, then condition 5 would still stand. That would still allow operations 7 till 1 on a Saturday, and that would still allow crushing operations and HGV movements according to the hours on conditions 5, which I don't think that's what you were suggesting, but that's in your gift. Absolutely.
Yeah. Someone is saying.
Sorry, Chairman. I'd take advice on this. On item 5, we've got 7 to 8, 6 o'clock, Monday to Friday. Can that be changed to 7 to 5? And then exclude 6 altogether?
That's absolutely fine. That would still allow for crushing operations on a Saturday as well. So if you're happy with that, then it's okay.
David, you're happy with that as the proposer? Okay, so we're all clear now then, I hope. All in favour of David's proposition then? Right, Mr. Cross.
So now you need to vote on the reasons for refusal. So I don't know if I can perhaps ask Nick to perhaps formulate, in the light of what committee have said, and in particular what Mr. Sheehan has said, the reasons that officers feel is what you're using as refusal reasons, for you then, if you agree with it, to put it to the vote and see where that takes us.
So we're looking for reason for refusal then. Reasons? Sean?
There's different courses of option in front of you at the moment. You could move a different motion with a different amended condition, or you could obviously move to refuse subject to reasons. One suggestion from Mr. Sheehan has been suggested that a refusal on highway safety grounds and reference to policies and the National Planning Policy Framework. So yes, that would certainly be something that you could do. In my view, you could refer to paragraph 109 of the National Planning Policy Framework, where it talks about the impact on highway safety. You could also refer to policy WDC 10, 2 and 3, which refers again to the impact on highway safety, the condition of the road. What I would say, of course, is that is contrary to the advice of the local highway authority, and if this is refused on that basis, potentially you could be looking at an appeal that would need to be defended, and we would need to come up with reasons as to why that conflict occurs. I'm not suggesting that wouldn't be possible, but I just want you to be aware that the professional advice is that would be challenging. The other area which you could give consideration to is the impact on the environment and amenity, which I think has been touched on by one or two members. I'm not suggesting you add additional items to strengthen the argument. I'm just saying that you should give consideration to that. So one option would be to consider the impact on the amenity of occupiers of nearby properties through disturbance and noise, which again, there is policies support for that potentially on WCS 8 and WDC 10, and there's also guidance within paragraph 180 of the MPPF that deals with that as well. So there is a potential line if members are concerned about that disturbance angle. Again, we don't believe that that is the case. We believe that the impacts would not be significant enough to justify that, but that's something you can give thought to. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Sean?
I'll be so bold as to move refusal for the grounds set out, and I'll just repeat what I said, that I believe the officers have chosen the wrong test for whether this is acceptable. They've chosen the severity of impact when they should have been looking at whether it was acceptable in terms of highway safety. They've not seemed to have picked up any evidence of the number of horses that use the lane, so I'd suggest that they're not in a really very strong position to make a judgment on the acceptability of highway safety, whereas we are in as good, if not a better position to do so. So I think that would cover the point that was raised about the conflict between our opinions and that of the highways officers. So I think I've made that point sufficiently, and the grounds as the policy I've already set out, and there's one or two more that have been picked up by the officers. So I'm happy to move on that basis, Chair, that we refuse.
And Chair, I'll second Mr. Sheen.
Did you want to speak again, Mr. Parton?
And I'll second.
Anyone? Mrs.
Could I just say one of my real concerns is that the conditions that have been mentioned are not enforceable, and that is something I would use as well to strengthen the reasoning on safety, is that I don't feel on a practical point of view and a safety reason that the conditions are forcible enough to ensure the safety.
Thank you. Mr. Cross, have you heard enough to formulate a reason for refusal?
So, in essence, the summary... Oh, I think Nick's going to... Read it out if you want. Yes. Okay. Thanks, Nick. So the reason for refusal is focusing on highway safety grounds, and it's this. The proposed development would result in harm to the safety of users of Mill Road as a direct result of conflict between heavy goods vehicles and horse riders and pedestrians, which could not be satisfactorily mitigated through planning conditions. Approval of the application would therefore be contrary to policy WC 10, 2 and 3 of the Leicestershire and Leicester Waste Development Framework Core Strategy and Development Control Policies 2009, and paragraph 109 of the National Planning Policy Framework 2019. WDC 10.
Right. Does that form your proposal then, Sean, do you think? Yeah. Mr. Parton?
Could we add on to that, though, Chair, about the effect on the nearby residents, the environment, and the...
So, Chairman, this would be along the following lines then. So this would be a second reason for refusal. Under the Environment Amenity heading, the proposed development would cause unacceptable harm to the amenity of occupiers of nearby properties by reason of frequent and sudden noise and disturbance caused by heavy goods vehicles using Mill Lane. Approval of the application would therefore be contrary to policies WCS 8 and WC 10 of the aforementioned Development Framework Core Strategy and Development Control Policies 2009 and paragraph 180 of the National Planning Policy Framework 2019. I would, though, with regard to that second reason for refusal, just give a professional view that I think that's lighter than the first one in terms of defensibility, but it is a planning reason. Thank you.
Sean, are you happy with that?
Yeah, if it keeps everybody on board, Chairman, definitely.
Yeah, okay. Right. Well, we've all heard what's been said. That's all it leaves to do. All in favour of the proposition to refuse with what Mr. Cross has said?
10. 10 in favour. And those against?
It is refused.
Those against?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, anyone against then? Sorry. Oh, 2. 2 against. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. go and sit down, Mr. Paul. Okay, thank you very much. We'll resume the meeting then. Item number 8, brickworks at Desford. Nick.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So there's two elements to this application. The first element is a 26-hectare extension to the existing quarry. That is to the south of Heath Road, north of Merrilees Road. So the existing quarry is shown on the aerial photograph on the screen, with the existing brickworks shown in the centre, just above the centre of the screen. So the second element of the application is to demolish the existing brickworks and to construct a new, larger, state-of-the-art brickworks facility just north of the existing facility. You'll see on that image that the site is located to to the east of Bagworth Heathwood and to an area of restored quarry land. The main access to the site is off Heath Road, with also a secondary point of access via the sidings through Merrilees Industrial Estate. So this image shows the two portions of the site. The new quarry area is located to the south, edged in red, 26-hectare site. And the existing quarry is to the north of Heath Road, with obviously that's a much larger part of the site, 50.3 hectares, with the brickworks located at the very northern part, which is around 6 hectares in site. Slightly closer zoomed in image, so you'll see of the area to the south of the road, 26-hectare site, 18 hectares of which would be released for the extraction of clay, with the remainder of the site for landscaping restoration works. And I'll show you in a moment a slide with the phasing, but the intention is that area to the south of the road will be worked first, and then the existing quarry will be continued to be worked on the northern part of the site. So the new brickworks would be, as I say, located at the very north. So the new brickworks would be located. The scheme proposes 2 options, very similar in terms of construction, but one is slightly larger than the other. And the reason for the 2 options is that the final technology is not yet known. So the permission would give the applicant the option to implement either building when that detail is known. But in terms of the footprint and the impacts, they are very, very similar. So these are two options. You'll see the buildings are similar in terms of form and will be located in the same location. The land where the building would be located, there is currently a brick stockpiling area, up to 6 months of storage of bricks. That will be relocated to where the existing building is, just to the south of where the building would go, and also an additional stockpiling area further to the south on that image. So this is a plan showing the amendments to the approved working for the quarry. So you'll see in terms of phasing, it's intended that the first phase would be within the new extended quarry area to the south, and that would work in a westerly direction before being restored, and then being the works to then continue over onto the northern side of Heath Road, phase 4, 5, 6, and then up towards the north where it would be completed. The workings would take approximately 38 years, overall permission with 40 years to include the final restoration of the site. As part of the proposals, a new tunnel will be constructed to link the quarry, the extended quarry to the south, with the existing quarry to the north. And there's a cross-section, section BB, just at the bottom left-hand side of that image, which shows that will be large enough to allow dumper trucks to transport the material from different parts of the site. And this is a plan showing the intended restoration, so 2 large bodies of water with obviously extensive landscaping profiling throughout the site to bring the restoration back to in the natural state when the works are complete. This is a photograph of the area to the south of Heath Road where the mineral will be extracted. So additional planting will be provided along there. So that's where the just to the left-hand side of that image there'd be the tunnel through to cross underneath the road. So you'll see from the application that we are recommending approval. There's been a previous permission in 2013 with a set of conditions to address the impacts. This application has been subject to environmental impact assessment, and the wording of a lot of the conditions in the recommendation mirror those that were attached previously. The recommendation is to approve. There would be a Section 106 agreement that would deal with vehicle routing, such as and also the community liaison. And so subject to those conditions and the 106, we're recommending that the application be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Is there anything from Mr. Bedford? No. Okay. Mr. Crooks, you're down as the adjoining member. Would you like to?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Is that on? Yeah. I've not got a problem with the actual brickworks. There is one there now, and it doesn't cause any problems at all. And quite a number of the people that work there are actually from my division. So, talking to them, I'm advised quite recently they went over to 3 shifts to try and keep up with the production. So, a new automated works, which it probably will be a good help to the area. The one concern is the lorries coming out of there, and obviously this will increase the lorries, I would have thought, and they head through Botcheston mainly up towards the M1, and I know it's a designated lorry route, but it is all country lanes, and the lorries are overriding the grass verges, and it is causing some concern with local people. Putting more lorries on this narrow road is not going to help. I do know that there's a heavy goods line that runs right past this brickworks, and there's a sidings there. And I know that Barden Quarry uses it quite a bit to shift aggregates, and I wonder if that's been investigated, or could be investigated, to try and get some of the lorries off the road, putting them on the trains, because I think that's got to be the way forward, the way things are going. So that's that. Just a minor detail, well, 2 minor details. One, in 11.2 it talks about Balston fishing lakes. Well, I've been the councillor there for 32 years and I don't know of any fishing lakes. There's a few ponds, but they're on our recreation ground, and we certainly wouldn't like people fishing in there. So that was that. And the other thing is, the nearest village to this is Thornton, which is Councillor O'Shea's. Has he not been consulted?
Anyone else likely to answer the questions on the lorry movements and that sort of? Mr. Crooks, any comments on that?
There's an existing routing agreement in place. It is a valid point, and this is always one of the main issues with this type of proposal. There's an existing routing agreement in place, and you'll see as part of the recommendation that there is a Section 106 proposed that will propose to review that to make sure that the routing is appropriate and that we avoid residential areas where possible. But that's a key issue with this type of application. That's no different in terms of what we're proposing here today.
Anyone else wish to speak, say anything? Mrs. Wright.
Just to pick up on the point of the highways and the cumulative effects, because we've just heard that there'll be more lorries, and I think I read somewhere about flow gas lorries or something already using it anyway, and I was just interested about the cumulative effect, following the point on from Mr. Crooks.
Yeah, the Highway Authority obviously reviewed all the submitted transport evidence by the applicant, and based on the additional HGV movements, we could not foresee that there'd be a adverse effect on the highway based on the agreed routing agreement, so we were not in a position to advise refusal. So the residual cumulative impact of development was considered to be mitigation was possible, and the HGV routing was not considered to be an issue as part of this development.
Was part of that mitigation taking on board the point Mr. Crooks made about the sidings?
It would have looked at all aspects of the application. So if the applicant did put forward the use of trains, as Mr. Councillor Crooks has suggested, then that would have been taken into consideration, yes.
Anyone else who is still looking for a proposition from someone? Or, Mrs. Fryer.
I would like to propose we officer's recommendation.
Seconded, Chairman.
Subject to the conditions as laid out in the report.
Thank you, Mrs. Fryer. Anyone else wish to speak, or do you want to move to the vote now? Okay. Well, it's been moved and seconded then. All in favour of the proposition to permit? Yep. That looks to be unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item number 9 then. That's the car park at Primary School, Leicester Road, Inkley. Peter.
Thank you. This is a proposal for a new off-street drop-off and pick-up car parking zone at Hinkley Park's Primary School, which is about 500 metres north-east of the centre of Hinkley. As you can see from the plan in front of you, it's a roughly triangular plot of land with current access for vehicles off Leicester Road, and that's only used by staff and visitors. There's no off-street parental parking at the moment. What's been proposed by the school is that off Butt Lane, which is this road here, they would have a new development here with 21 off-street parking spaces for parents to drive in, remain in their car, and either drop their children off with a adult from the school, be it a volunteer or a member of staff, who would then take the child safely onto the school grounds, and the car would then leave. And conversely, in an afternoon, they would park up and children would be taken to the cars by the same volunteer or staff, and the car would leave, and hopefully the bay would be available for somebody else to use. So it would provide 21 off-street parking bays. As you can see, there's a specific in, specific out proposed. On-street, there's currently no parking restrictions along this stretch of road here. So what's proposed is some double yellow lines either side of the accesses. So we would lose 13 on-street parking bays, giving a net increase of 8 bays off-street, which should hopefully reduce parking along that stretch of road. Members will note, I mean, it's difficult to see on this plan, I appreciate, but there are pedestrian railings proposed at the site accesses so that children can't just run out from the site onto the main road. There would be some loss of hedgerow to create these access points, although the trees that are along this road, which are quite mature and quite attractive, my photograph's not doing full justice, but the site access would be located here between that mature tree and these mature trees along here. Members will know it's on a 20 miles an hour stretch of road, so there's some quite efficient traffic calming there already. I think one issue for members to appreciate and understand is that the car parking will take place on land that's currently used as playing fields. Sport England have raised an objection to that unless the school is willing to enter into a community use agreement that covers outside school hours used by junior football teams or other community users. There is a distinct lack of facilities for junior sports facilities in Hinckley. It's an identified issue, and Sport England have said if we can get a community use agreement, that's fine. They will not object. The school has welcomed that community use agreement idea and has committed to signing up to such an agreement. So the key issues really for members to consider are the loss of sports grounds, although it's hoped that the parking bays and the community use agreement will offset that. Some local residents have raised concerns about traffic being coming onto Butt Lane that possibly wouldn't do already. The Highway Authority has considered the proposal and thinks it's acceptable. The applicant has undertaken and completed a full traffic management plan which has been submitted and approved, and that includes plans for how it will be managed on a day-to-day basis, the hours of use, how it will be laid out, the double yellow lines, etc. And the Highway Authority has approved that in principle, and Condition 2 requires the development to take place in accordance with that traffic management plan. So I think that's it from me, Chairman. I will pass it back to you.
Yep. Thank you, Peter. Anything from Mr. Mullaney?
I've not received any comments from Mr. Mullaney.
Okay. Well, it is recommended approval. Anyone wish to speak? Or Mr. Bolter?
How many car parking spaces are at the moment for the staff? Are any going to be lost? No. And where are the children dropped off at the minute to get to the school? On the road? Yeah. So this is going to be a plus then, can't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Crooks?
Chairman, if they park on the road and they're going to put accesses and yellow lines, they're going to lose that parking on the road. So it's going to be 21 minus whatever is on the road, I would have thought. Having said that, any parking outside the school is welcome. I've got half a dozen schools that I could ask for parking on, and I'm just surprised that this has occurred, but I can only welcome it, Chairman.
Yeah. Are you moving it, Mr. Crooks? You will, yeah. Seconded by...
No, and I'll just say, I mean, I'll be dead pleased myself if I got this in one of my schools, and I expect we'd all say the same. I'd love to know which budget it came out of. Or was it Section 106 agreement? Do we know?
I've contacted the applicant and I am advised that the money has come out of the County Council's budget.
If there's no further comments, then we'll move to the vote on this recommendation to permit. All in favour? Yep, that looks to be unanimous then, you. Right. Item number 10 is any other items the Chairman has decided to take. We haven't any of those, and under 11, thanks very much for coming, and this is the last meeting of this year. There will be obviously perhaps new people on the next well, the cycle goes from May to May, doesn't it? So you see what I mean? No, you're not getting away with that. But so we'll see what happens in May, whether we're all here or somebody's not or whatever. But thank you very much.